So this question, whoa, that's a little bit too small. This question comes from a actual SAT. So if you haven't done this one, I recommend not paying much attention to this. But it's about vocab and context. Okay, so here we go. Often find that on words and context questions on the SAT, I understand the meanings of all the answer choices, but I still get stuck between two choices and end up choosing the wrong one. What do you suppose the reason is for this? So the example you have here is, but change the conversation to food and suddenly efficiency doesn't look good. Conventional industrial agriculture has become incredibly efficient on a simple land to food basis. And so here are our choices. I can easily eliminate B and C. But to me, straightforward and easy are synonyms. And I don't understand why the correct answer is A. So in some ways, they're synonyms, but not always. The issue here is that words don't just have one definition. They can have many definitions, some which overlap, some which are different. So straightforward and easy can have some different definition when you're talking about things being easy to do, like their difficulty. So they can be easy or they can be straightforward. But there's another definition of straightforward, which is mimicking or standing in for how simple is being used here. Because you might also say that simple could also mean like easy to do. And that's true. They all overlap in that way. But simple and straightforward have another definition that's operative here. Straightforward and simple are also about the complexity of something, which certainly could be easy as a result of it being simple. But it's about whether it's something complex or whether it is simple, right? It's that distinction. So straightforward is that same idea of being not complex, being simple, direct, being limited to a single factor as what's being discussed here. The whole point of the sentence is to say that it's incredibly efficient on just a land to food basis, just only, simply, straightforwardly, in a non-complex way if you're only looking at the factor of a land to food basis. So it's nothing to do with difficulty, nothing to do with ease of understanding or how hard something is. That's not the realm of words we're in, which is why D is not the answer. But A is the better answer because we're talking about simplicity versus complexity, and that's the realm we're in. So going back to your original question, what is the reason for this? There are other definitions at play. It's not often just one definition that's going to be the consideration. It's going to be a word can have many different definitions, many different ideas, and so you need to capture all of that when you are thinking about what choice might be best. What is the best way to improve quickly on the reading section? Unfortunately, there's no way to improve quickly. I mean, it depends, I guess, what you mean by quickly. If you mean like in a week, really hard. If you mean a month, a little bit easier, but still kind of hard. If you mean like in 2 months, maybe a bit more doable. So quickly depends on your time frame. Usually for reading, you're talking about in the frame of weeks or months rather than days or weeks. Otherwise, there's really, unfortunately, no way to improve quickly because it's all about the skill of reading, right? Think about the reading you've done from the beginning of the time you started reading until now. All of that is that foundation upon which you're drawing. So literally, I don't know, a decade of reading coming into play here. So how do you change that quickly? You can't. So what you have to do is focus on the particular passages, the question types, the strategies, the trap answers. Really learn this test as best you can. Learn the best strategies for approaching the passages and approaching the questions as best you can. And then use that as a basis to see if you can bump up your score quickly. I think a lot of times with reading, you can improve quickly if there's some inefficiencies that you can iron out. Most people, though, will hit a wall at some point, and that's when you get into the slog of having to just work and practice consistently. And so, yeah, there's no real quick way, but there is a consistent effort way where you want to learn the strategies and tips and then continue building your reading comprehension skills. How would you recommend getting started for the SAT Math 2 subject test? I'm hoping to get 800. First thing to do is take a practice test, a real SAT 2 subject test timed. Take it timed, score it, see where you're at. If you're at a 650, then you've got a lot of work to do. If you're at a 760, then you're pretty close. So it's kind of figuring out where you're at. Then you need to start accruing a list or compiling a list of the topics that give you the most trouble. The subject test in Math 2 is quite broad. It covers a lot of things, some of which you've covered, other things maybe not as much, but you need to figure out what stuff you need to learn and what you don't. So that's going to be through practice tests, essentially. Get yourself a good couple prep books. No major recommendations. I usually, recommend Princeton Review or Barron's or even Dr. Chung's, though Dr. Chung's is sometimes a little bit too hard, I think, for the real thing. But get yourself a good couple practice books. go through those practice tests, start compiling those topics, and then pursue resources to review those topics, whether that might be Khan Academy or the prep books or tutoring or courses, whatever it might be. Start to learn those topics and continue taking practice tests. There's no real secret sauce here. There's no like secret activity that if you did, you'll get an 800. It's just the daily quotidian work of, I guess that's redundant, but the daily work of just working consistently, identifying your weaknesses, building on your strengths, and doing practice tests. That's really what it comes down to. I'm not doing well in the ACT science section. I know for reading, I have to read a ton of books. For science, what should I do? Where can I find experiments or graphs of trust? Yeah, this is tricky. The science section is so weird and artificial in many ways that, unlike with reading, it's like, okay, go find some books to read and just read every day. Read magazine articles, read newspaper stories, read whatever, read consistently. I don't know if there's that much you can do for science in that regard in terms of an outside study. I mean, really, in the end, it just comes down to if you like. I mean, you could read about science. I mean, that's one thing you can do, and that will help you with both, actually. So you can find some books on science topics that you're interested in, or read magazine articles or whatever, newspaper articles about science. That actually can do both for you. So that's actually a good idea, now that I think about it. So what you can do is read for both. Pick books, magazines, articles, etc. that deal with topics in science, and that can help you with your reading comprehension and your understanding of scientific principles. Beyond that, I don't know where you are in your test prep journey, how early you are, but paying attention to your science classes, very important, obviously. But beyond that, then it's just doing practice science tests. That's what comes down to, doing practice science tests, and then most importantly, spending the time after the test reviewing every single question, not just the ones you get right, or not just the ones you get wrong, but even the ones you get right, because you need to make sure, do I understand this question? Did I get it right for good reasons? Do I fully understand it? Do I understand the principles and the concepts involved? It should take you more time, especially at first, to review your tests than it does to take it. So if the science section is 35 minutes, you should probably be spending at least 35 minutes reviewing it after. Again, at first. As you get deeper into this, you don't have to spend as much time doing that. But especially at first, when you're learning, you really want to take your time with each one. The biggest mistake students make is they just do practice test after practice test after practice test, and they don't spend the time in between the tests learning, because the tests don't teach you anything. Tests give you a sense of where you're at. It's reviewing the tests. It's doing practice sections, reading, videos, tutoring, courses, classes, working with friends. That's where you'll learn, not the test. The tests just give you a number. It's what you do with the number, and it's what you do with the material afterwards that makes more of a difference. So that's, I think, the overall recipe for doing better on ACT Science. Is there any way to read faster and focus better on the ACT? Because the last time I took the ACT, I ran out of time. I assume you mean the reading section. And so I talk about a lot of this in my video, so check out my ACT reading playlist on YouTube. I go into a lot of details about time and time management, things like that. I will say reading faster as a goal is not much of a thing. Some people might teach like speed reading or things like that. I first off, I'm super unconvinced that speed reading is actually a thing. I think it's a fancy way of saying skimming. And while skimming is a skill, skimming is not really going to help you in this situation. So I wouldn't worry about reading faster. You're going to read at a certain speed, and that speed is very much based on a lot of factors, which are not something you can just change in a week. Instead, again, it kind of comes back to what I was saying with reading. It's about the strategy. Are you approaching the reading passages, as an example, in a reproducible, efficient, rational way? Or are you just going into it seeing what happens? Read the passage, go to the questions, and see what happens. I mean, just to give you an idea, like when I go to a reading test on the ACT, I know exactly what my game plan is to the letter. I mean, obviously the passage and the questions, I don't know what they're going to be, but I know what I'm going to be doing. And this is basically the idea. I open up the test booklet in ACT reading. I skip passage 1 because fiction is my weakest, and I go to passage 2 because I want to do my easier passages first. I go to passage 2, I skim the passage in 2 to 3 minutes looking for the main idea and the overall structure of the passage. I go to the questions, I do the line reference questions, then keyword questions, then general questions, and then time waster questions I do at the end. Then I do the same for passage 3, same for passage 4, same for passage 1. And that's the routine. So I know exactly how I'm going to approach these passages. And that's much more important, at least at the first move, than trying to read faster. I mean, certainly reading speed matters, but that's not something we can control right away. Let's control what we can control, which is how we approach the passages and the questions and all that stuff. So focus on that. Focus on the overall approach and strategy, how you tackle questions, focusing on what's important and ignoring what's not, and that will make a lot bigger difference to your overall score, especially in the short term. Okay, while I was going through some practice ACT science questions, I noticed there were a few questions that were not answerable from the info provided in the passage. Do we have to know additional knowledge? Yes, there is some additional knowledge you need to know, outside knowledge. The best source that I have for this is my own ACT Science Facts, what do I call it? ACT Science Factoid Sheet. It's included in my ACT Science Bootcamp course, which lists out what I think are the main outside knowledge topics you need to know. It's not much, it's pretty thin, but it's stuff like what is the pH scale, what is the formula for density, basic genetics concepts, basic chemistry and physics concepts and formulas, things like that do seem to come up more often than not. I recommend checking that out on my site. There are probably in the ACT Science Bootcamp. There are probably other resources out there if you Google like ACT Science Outside Knowledge, but the most comprehensive source that I know of is in my factoid sheet. I'm sure other books probably have them as well. So there are maybe 3 to 4 questions thereabouts that might require some outside knowledge. That would be a place to get resources for that. Otherwise, though, most of the questions can be answered with just reading, with just the graph and the figure.